Instead of getting into these infinite regressions of what is beneath, what is behind, look, it's right out in front of you now. And when you catch on to that, now it gets very profound. Alan Watts. Good evening, folks. So tonight I'm going to go over Alan Watts. I've been doing a lot of listening to Alan Watts's speeches and talks. I've also been looking into a little bit more of Eastern philosophy, very similar to the Tao, and I'll probably be doing a segment later on that. I also want to do a segment on Terence McKenna. So you can go ahead and look forward to these if you want. If you just want to listen to the work without just me doing any commentary, you can. It's going to be in the description box where you can go ahead and listen. I'm sure you could find this online yourself. So let's get going to it. What I am going to do is I'm going to have this played back. It's an hour and 45 minutes and 21 seconds long, and there's also the written part. But what I'm gonna do is, when there's something that just stands out, and I've probably listened to this a couple of times already, but I've yet to write anything down as far as notes. I probably should, but I guess I like to what's that saying? Play it by ear. Anyways, that's why I'm doing this live. Otherwise, I could just recorded it and put in segments and done like part 1, part 2, part 3. And again, it's also participation. So if you are one of the few people who are watching live, you can make a comment, ask questions, and maybe I'll answer it. Most of the time, it will probably be I don't know. All right, so without further ado, here we go.
Between Western psychology, psychiatry, and psychotherapy and the so-called religions of Asia, there is common ground because both are interested in changing states of human consciousness. Whereas institutional Western religion, Christianity, Judaism, and even Islam are relatively less interested in this matter. Western religions are more concerned with behavior, doctrine, and belief than with any transformation of the way in which we are aware of ourselves and of the world. But this matter concerns psychiatry and psychology very much. Only those states of consciousness which are not normal are usually treated in Western psychology as being in some way sick. There are, of course, exceptions to this, and there have increasingly been exceptions in the work of Jung and to some extent even of Grodek, of Prinzhorn, of more modern people, Rogers and Ronald Lang. Changing consciousness is often looked upon as a form of therapy. But in general, different states of consciousness from the normal are regarded as a form of sickness. And therefore, official and institutional psychiatry constitutes itself the guardian of sanity and of socially approved experience of reality. And very often it seems to me that reality appears rather much the way the world is seen on a bleak Monday morning. in this official doctrine, I might even say dogma, of what reality is. Because after all, we know that our science, such as it is of psychology, is founded in the scientific naturalism of the 19th century. And the metaphysical and mythological assumptions of that science still underlie a great deal of psychological thinking, in behaviorism eminently, but also to a large extent in official psychoanalysis. Indeed, one might say that psychoanalysis is based on Newtonian mechanics and, in fact, could be called psychohydraulics. Not that that analogy is altogether inappropriate, because there are certainly respects in which our psychic life flows and exhibits the dynamics of water. But of course we want to know what kind of water, and for the scientific naturalism of the 19th century, the basic energies of nature were considered to be very much inferior to human consciousness in quality. Ernst Haeckel, a biologist of that time, would think of the energy of the universe as blind energy. And correspondingly, it seems to me that Freud thought of the libido as essentially blind, unconscious energy, embodying only a kind of formless, unstructured, and insatiable lust. This is a generalization. Some modification in that thinking is, of course, possible. But the tendency is to regard all that which lies below the surface of human consciousness as being less evolved, because you must remember that this was also the time of Darwin's theories of evolution, of seeing the human mind as a fortuitous development from much more primitive forms of life, coming forth by purely mechanical processes, by natural selection and by the survival of the fittest. And therefore, man was in general seen as a fluke of nature, an embodiment of reason, emotion, and values, for which the more basic processes of nature had no sympathy and about which they did not care. If, therefore, the human race is to flourish, we must take charge of evolution. It can no longer be left to spontaneous process, but must be directed by human ingenuity, despite the fact that although our brains are capable of dealing with a colossal number of variables at once, our conscious attention is not. Most people cannot consider more than 3 variables at the same time without using a pencil. And this shows that in many ways the scanning process of man's conscious attention is very inadequate for dealing with the infinitely many variables, the multidimensional processes of the natural universe. However, a serious attempt has been made, and scientific naturalism issued in a fantastic fight with nature, in this whole notion of the conquest and subordination of nature, which has, as a matter of fact, very ancient non-scientific and biblical origins, with the idea of man as the head and chief and ruler of nature in the image of God. And the time has now dawned upon us all when our attempts to beat nature into submission are having alarming results, because we see that it's very dangerous to mess around with processes that we don't understand, that have enormous numbers of variables, and we begin to wonder whether we hadn't better let well enough alone. At the same time, although I said that Western psychology had more in common, or more common interest with Oriental religion than it does with Western religion, there is a sense in which psychiatry and psychotherapy are becoming the religion of the West. Psychoanalysis has much in common with the forms and procedures of institutional religion. There is, for example, apostolic succession, the passing down of mana, of qualified power to practice therapy from the father founder, Sigmund Freud, through his immediate apostles, to an enormous company of archbishops and bishops, among whom there are, of course, as there were with Christianity, heresiarchs such as Jung and Grodek and Rank and Reich. And the heresiarchs are duly excommunicated and anathematized. There are rituals, as there are also rituals with religion. There is the sacrament of the couch. There is the spiritual discipline of free association. There is the mystic knowledge of the interpretation of dreams. And there are also the two great symbolic fetishes, the long one and the round one. Now, it's extraordinarily easy to make fun of all this. And we must not forget that we owe a tremendous debt to Freud, if for nothing else than pointing out that much of ourselves of which we are aware in terms of the conscious ego is not really ourselves. It is something superficial. However we define its nature, it is superficial. And the realities of human life are not under the gaze of its scanning process, at least not in the ordinary way. And that was a tremendous revelation. There's no question about that. But one sees troublesome signs when the doctrines and processes of psychiatry, psychoanalysis, and so forth become officialized. And I think Thomas Sass, in his books, The Myth of Mental Illness and The Manufacture of Madness, is pointing out something extremely important to us, which is that, in effect, the psychological official of today is the priest, and that he is beginning to exercise the same sort of controls over human life as were exercised by the church in the Middle Ages. So that a professor of psychiatry at Columbia or Harvard or Yale medical schools has today the same sort of intellectual respectability and authority as the professor of theology at the University of Toledo or Padua would have had in the year 1400.
There we go. That's odd. That didn't work. What's interesting here at this point is when he's talking about the authority of today is not the priesthood, which in centuries before and still today is an authority. For example, say the Pope or someone says, "Hey, this is God's authority." It's like, "Hey, who made you authority? Who made you the authority?" You go, "God." It's like, "Well, how do we know that?" "Well, I'm I'm the whoever, whatever their position is. It's like, are you saying you contest God? And you're like, no, I guess not. But there's no proof, no evidence, whatever. And then so today it's more of you're the leading so-called expert, but who made you the expert? Is it credentials? Is it because you went to school? You've got this degree, you got this diploma, you've got recognition, you've got stuff published in books. Is that what makes you the authority? Or is it just most people just take your word for it and therefore you are the authority? Does that make it any more or less true or false? Not necessarily. And when we talk about experts, and that's a lot of the talk where people who believe in authority, they believe in the experts, whether it's the propaganda of mainstream news or government or whoever, or hey, maybe even people out there who talk about, hey, the world isn't flat because these experts said it wasn't. They proved it. And then let's talk about what makes one an expert. They probably won't talk about that. So what does make an expert? Let's say credentials do. Let's say you've graduated from university, you've got a PhD and a doctorate, and degrees in like 3 different degrees. Does that make you an expert, the leading expert? Or we've got some fella, say we're talking about computer science or computer engineering. And then you've got this fella working in his garage, no degrees, and you're going to say, well, of course, the person with credentials is going to be the leading expert. He's going to know more about this person. Yet, in the garage, you just call them an amateur. And then the so-called amateur in his garage ends up being someone like Bill Gates, and ends up making something that everybody uses, is now a household item. Name is recognized all over the place. The product, and something where the leading so-called expert, as far as with credentials of degrees and whatnot, shows that, well, that person maybe had that ability but didn't. So who's the expert? Who would you pick in saying the expert in computer science? The person with credentials, the person with before the recognition, would you have recognized, say, Bill Gates as an expert, or do you recognize him now as an expert? Or now it's what, 20 or so years since? Is that person still an expert, or has it been outdated, or is he? Anyways, it just keeps going. So this is kind of what comes to my mind when Alan Watts is talking about the priesthood of today. And so anyways, I'll shut up now and we'll continue on.
Now you must realize that the theologians of those days not simply believed in their cosmology and the theology, they almost knew it was true, in the same way that our scientists know certain things to be true. Despite the fact that they change their opinions very often, while they hold them, they have in effect the force of dogma, as witness the anathematization of Velikovsky for his uncomfortable ideas. And therefore, there are heresies existing today which are persecuted in the same way as heresies were persecuted by the Holy Inquisition. And they are persecuted out of kindness, in exactly the same way that the Holy Inquisition persecuted heresy out of kindness and deep concern for human beings. That is unimaginable to us, but it was so. For after all, if you seriously believed that someone who did not hold the Catholic faith and who voluntarily rejected it would be tortured physically and spiritually, forever and ever and ever in hell, you would resort to almost any means to preserve a fellow human being from such a fate, especially if the complaint or disease of heresy from which he suffered was infectious. You would first of all reason with him. And if he was not responsive to reason, you would resort to abuse and to forceful argument. And if he was not responsive to that, you would give him shock treatment and bang him about. If that didn't work, the thumbscrew and the rack and the Iron Maiden. And if that didn't work, as a last desperate resort, you would burn him at the stake in the pious hope that in the midst of those searing fires he would think better and make a last act of perfect contrition, and so be rescued from everlasting damnation. And you did all this in the spirit of this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you, in the spirit of a surgeon who is very, very sorry indeed that he has to make you undergo this extremely painful operation. But it is in your best interests, and there really is at least a 50-50 chance that you may survive. And so, therefore, in perfectly scientific medical spirit, people may be very arbitrarily and without due process deprived of their civil rights, incarcerated in prisons that are in many cases much worse than prisons for criminals, and generally left to rot, be neglected and ignored, and when bumptious, given shock treatment or put in solitary confinement. For what? Because they have unorthodox and heretical states of consciousness. A lot of these people are not dangerous until provoked into being dangerous by being ignored, by being treated as machines, and in generally defined as non-human. And if you are defined as non-human, there's precious little you can do about it, because everything you say that sounds human will be taken as a kind of utterance of a mechanical man, as imitating humanness out of lunatic cunning. You will be suspicious. Everything you say will be listened to in a different way and with different ears. And you will have one hell of a time talking yourself out of it, because there really are no rules as to what one must do when incarcerated for having unorthodox consciousness. There is no clear road to repentance. And this is found likewise in jails, where people are incarcerated on 1 to 10-year sentences, as in places like Vacaville, California, where when I visited such prisons, young men have come to me in perfect desperation, saying, I don't know what's happened to me, because I want to live like a decent citizen. I know I've done things that are wrong, but I simply don't know what is expected of me here. If I try to do what's expected, they say I'm compliant. And that seems to be some sort of a sickness.
Anyways, first, hi, Kathy. What have you been up to? And this kind of brings me back to what I want to do, just kind of a dedicated live stream or video on, is like altered states of consciousness, or just different mindset, you could say. But let's just talk about mind-altering substances such as marijuana, ayahuasca, mescaline, magic mushrooms, what have you. They are, as far as in the United States, illegal. They are what's a class 1 drug, so you can go to prison. It's a felony for taking them, except for a few exceptions. And it's like, why and how did it get to that point? Were there tests that were given to just a random amount of people and saying, okay, let's study the effects of what this drug does, or this drink, or whatever it is? and let's see what happens. And they took it, and they looked at the data, and they go, well, if they drive or if they operate machinery, that's probably not a good thing. So let's just make it so that this whole thing is illegal. But then you get something like alcohol, which where you're pretty much inebriated, and a lot of people are addicted to it, and a lot of these class 1 drugs aren't, in which people are sent to prison. And most of the time, you're not going to want to do anything just except for simply sit down, lay down, or just relax. You're not going to go out and want to go drive or do anything of that sort. And yet, those altered states of consciousness are illegal. And more to that is this a consensus that was legislated through Congress people? Did they look at the data? Did they look at the people, and they go, hey, people can't handle this? Or did any one of those who simply legislated to be against it ever try it? And if they've tried it and it becomes illegal, isn't that something that, well, of course, it's not going to be that way. But I'm just saying, their states of consciousness are now altered. And whether they like it or not, I mean, they could probably take it and say, I don't like it, so let's make it illegal for everybody else to take it because it's not good. But there's plenty of things like that in the world. So that is a big discussion, big topic. Is you can't look at any of the data. You can't look at any information that was there when legislation was passed to make it illegal, and especially the repercussions of that illegality. Anyways, let's continue.
Thomas Sass drew attention to this when he quoted a discussion of the types of school children who may very well need therapy. There were overachieving children. There were underachieving children. There were children who exhibited erratic patterns. There were children who were sort of dully mediocre. In fact, every sort of child can be given a diagnostic name for his behavior which sounds sick. As Jung once suggested, life itself is a disease with a very poor prognosis. It lingers on for years and invariably ends with death. And I submit that in our present knowledge of the human mind, such power in the hands of psychiatrists is amazingly dangerous. For I would suggest that today we know about as much concerning the human mind as we knew about the galaxy in 1300. And that while there are indeed individuals who are certainly able to perform psychotherapy, it is the sheerest arrogance for anybody to say that he is officially qualified to do so. We do not know how it is done, just as we do not know, really, how musical, artistic, and literary genius is done. You cannot really teach it. You can put the tools for doing these things into people's hands, and you can show them how to use the tools. But whether they will use those tools with genius is quite unpredictable. And this is above all true of the art of psychotherapy. We don't know how it's done. We've got some vague ideas. There probably are some people who, by reason of their mental derangement, are probably not qualified to perform it, because they are maybe out just to make other people into messes. But to say that there are certain standards and certain examinations that can be passed and certificates that could be issued, which do indeed qualify people for this work, is, I think, pernicious nonsense. And is used, of course, out of economic self-interest when those who consider themselves official therapists run into competition. The same was done by religion. I was talking, imagine it, to a Buddhist priest in Thailand some years ago. I was looking at some books in a bookshop in the precincts of a Buddhist temple. And I was wandering over, and I noticed a book on a certain form of Buddhist meditation. And I murmured, Satipatthana, which is the name of a certain kind of Buddhist meditation. And a voice suddenly said to me, "You practice Satipatthana?" I looked up, and there was a skinny Buddhist monk in a yellow robe with rather red eyes looking at me. I said, "Not exactly Satipatthana. I use a different method. It's called Zen." "Oh, Satipatthana, not Zen." I said, "Oh, well, it's something like it, isn't it?" "No." "Well, it's rather like yoga," I said, "isn't it?" "Not yoga. No, Satipatthana different. Only right way." "Well, look," I said to him, "I have a lot of Roman Catholic friends who tell me that their way is the only right way. Who am I to believe?" "You know," I said, "you're like someone who's got a ferry boat for crossing the river." I used the Buddhist simile. "And another fellow down the stream has opened up ferry business. And you go to the government and say, he's not authorized to operate a ferry boat because he's competition to you. Let all operate ferry boats who will. And if you haven't got the sense to stay off one that sinks, it's your fault." And after all, I could say to him, "You believe that everything that happens to you is your own karma. So why worry?" But now, it's so interesting that since official psychiatry, and I underline that word official because I hope those of you in this audience who are therapists will regard yourselves as unofficial. At least that'll give you an out. But nevertheless, official psychiatry has curious things in common with Western religion as well as with Eastern. With Eastern, I said, only insofar as it has an interest in states of consciousness and inclines to regard other states of consciousness than the ordinary as sick. But it has one very important feature in common with Western religion.
I'm going to pause it there because I'm noticing something on YouTube, and I'm pretty sure it's just on YouTube. On D Live, it looks like it's okay, and same thing with Periscope. So, if you're watching this through YouTube, YouTube supposedly doesn't like it, even though the stream health is green, and so don't know what's up with that. Anyways, if you're watching this still somewhere, I am going to go ahead and put this up on LBRY, and you can always watch it there, and it will be undisturbed.
And to that, we have to go a little bit into Western religious history and ask ourselves what in Western religion, and especially in Christianity, and this goes also for Judaism and Islam, what is the great heresy? Curiously enough, the great heresy was first in the West committed by no less a person than Jesus Christ, who believed himself to be God. This, of course, will be unquestionably true if you think that the Gospel of St. John has historical value. It's a little vaguer in the Synoptic Gospels, but if you read the Gospel of St. John, there is absolutely no doubt about it, for he said, "I and the Father are one. He who has seen me has seen the Father. Before Abraham was, I am. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life." He said all that according to this gospel. And that is something that in the Western world you are not supposed to say. And especially you are not supposed to believe it. And naturally it was very difficult for Jesus, because he was saying all this in the context of the Hebrew culture. And he tried to find language in the Hebrew scriptures with which to express his state of consciousness, because he had an unusual state of consciousness. As I read it, he had cosmic consciousness, otherwise known as mystical experience, otherwise known as moksha, nirvana, bodhi, satori, fana elfana, or what you will. And that happens to people. It has happened as far back as we know. It happens all over the world and in all cultures. We don't know very much about it. We don't really know ways in which to make it happen, because it seems to be of the nature of it that it is a spontaneous surprise. But it unquestionably happens. And most people keep their mouths shut about it when it does.
And yeah, this is where I come in, or we come in, where most people who understand that part of what Alan Watts is saying, which is probably not many, because if I watched Alan or listened to Alan Watts or read about I read the works of Alan Watts and plenty of other people as well, and before I knew myself and who we are, I would have gone, well, this fella's in that case. What is this guy talking about? I got no idea. And it's the same as when you watch a movie or a show that has some occult or esoteric items within it. You won't notice it the first time because you don't know anything about it. Then you look more into it and you go, wow, that's pretty interesting. It's got a lot of the stuff that's not known to a lot of people, because a lot of people would never think of looking into something like that. And then once you look into it and you watch it and you go, wow, that's pretty cool. And then finally you watch it a third time and you realize, they got it wrong. They're trying, but credit where credit is due. They tried. And yeah, anyways, so a lot of this stuff, when things like this happen, you pretty much keep it to yourself. But I think it's going to be, well, first of all, you've got prophecy, so-called prophecy of those who claiming to be God, or heck, maybe even Jesus Christ, come again, whatever. And they're seen as the Antichrist, someone evil, someone, etc. And of course, if you listened to me in the past, that's probably just all to prevent anyone from sharing to other people who they are. At any rate, let us continue this. It is a long one, and I will just interrupt when I have something to comment on.
I had a friend who, in the middle of having a stroke, had this illumination, and he said to me, I fear to speak to my friends of this, but it was the most beautiful experience. I shall never be afraid of death. In fact, I recommend everyone to have a stroke.
I just had to quickly interject here. Yes. You'll notice people who come out of a coma are much different than they went into a coma. And this death experience is experienced within ayahuasca, the mother vine or the death vine. And you no longer fear death. You understand what death is, and you understand what life is, or you'll get to understand it. And let's keep listening.
This was my friend Jean Varda, lately deceased Greek painter. But Jesus certainly had this transformation of consciousness. And he was crucified for it. Why? Because he had committed an act of insubordination and treason against the cosmic government. Because if you believe that God is a monarch, an absolute, omniscient, and omnipotent authority, shall we say a sort of cosmic ego, then to claim to be that is to introduce democracy into the kingdom of heaven, to usurp divine authority, and to speak in its name without proper authorization. And they asked Jesus, by what authority do you speak? Of heaven or of men? And he was tricky about answering that one. He said, by what authority did John the Baptist speak? And they were nervous about answering that one. He could have asked, by what authority did Isaiah speak, etc., or Moses. But Moses became official authority. And if you could wangle it that what you said was simply an extension of what Moses said, because Rabbi so-and-so said it, who got it from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Moses, then it's okay. Notice this, that to be an authority today in the academic world depends on documentation. It's not enough to say, for I say unto you, you must put in your footnotes. And the more the footnotes, the more the authority, obviously. So, our dissertations tend to be books about books, about books about books, and our libraries multiply by mitosis. So, when somebody speaks as an authority, that means speaks as the author. That's all it means. It's a statement of which you are the author, and therefore for which you assume responsibility. That is to speak with authority. And to be original is likewise not to be freaky, but to speak from the origin. That is what Christians mean when they say to speak in the Spirit, to have your mouth possessed by the Holy Spirit, as they believe the mouth of Jesus was possessed by the Holy Spirit.
And the Holy Spirit, in many Western religious organizations, the Holy Spirit is a masculine spirit, but those who have, I guess, witnessed the Holy Spirit is a feminine essence. And yeah, I would say that my mouth has been possessed by the Holy Spirit. I guess I'm going to be crucified soon, huh?
So the gospel of Jesus, which of course was hushed up from its inception, was that wake up everybody and find out who you are. Asking that, again in the Gospel of St. John, they, pointing to his disciples, may be one, even as you, Father, and I are one.
And again, to interject and comment, is the ayahuasca experience, the first one, to find out who you are, second one, to find out who you aren't, and the third ayahuasca experience, to find out who we are. It's amazing. I don't think Alan Watts ever took ayahuasca. Who knows? But it's interesting the parallels of what his experience relates to mine, and it's a long ways. I mean, I was not yet born when Alan Watts had passed away, and this resonates even to now.
And when he was accused of blasphemy, the Jews took up stones to stone him, you know. And he said, "Many good works have I shown you from the Father, and from which of these do you stone me?" And they said, "For a good work we don't stone you, but for blasphemy, because you being a man make yourself God." Now listen to the reply. He said, is it not written in your law, I have said ye are gods? And if that is what the scripture says, it can't be denied. So why do you tell me I blaspheme because I say I am a son of God? No answer. Because I said I am a son of God. It doesn't say that in your King James translation. It says I am the son of God. And you'll see the italicized, and you will think that that is for emphasis if you don't realize that passages in italics in the King James Bible are interpolations by the translators. In Greek, leaving out the definite article is equivalent of having the indefinite article.
And this is largely overlooked because if you are in a orthodox or very authoritarian religion, they want all the power of you taken away from you little by little until you have none. And that is the biggest blasphemy of all, isn't it?
Weos to Theou is a son of God, not oios to Theou. So son of in Hebrew and in Arabic means of the nature of. When we call someone a son of a bitch, we mean bitchy. And so if you call someone a son of God, you mean divine, of the nature of God. As the Nicene Creed subsequently defined it, he is of one substance with the Father. But what happened was that this being blasphemy for the Jews, it became blasphemy for the Christians, for anyone else than Jesus to say it. They said, okay, baby, it was so with you, but there it stops. No more of this business. And as a result of that, Jesus was made irrelevant by pedestalization, by being kicked upstairs. In spite of the fact that he said, greater works than these that I do shall you do. Oh no, upstairs with you, baby, because we just can't have that sort of thing going on in a monarchical universe. We're not going to have democracy in the kingdom of heaven. So this is why the gospel is impossible, because we are supposed to follow the example of Christ, where he says, for example, be not anxious for the morrow. Do not worry about what you shall eat, what you shall drink, and what you shall wear. God will take care of you. Doesn't he take care of the birds? Don't the flowers grow? They're wonderful. They're crazy. They're great. What are you worrying about? I've never heard a sermon preached on that. Never. Because it's totally subversive. The economy would crash. So they say, oh yes, that's all very well, but he was the boss's son. See, he had that colossal advantage. Take up your cross and follow him. Hey, but wait a minute. I don't know I'm going to be resurrected 3 days later. I can't do all those miracles. He had an unfair advantage. So how can you ask us to follow the example of Christ? But supposing he didn't have an unfair advantage, supposing that what was true about Jesus as a son of God is true of us, only a few of us know it. And we are pretty careful to be quiet about it, lest the same thing happen to us as happened to Jesus. And indeed it often does. And you know, you get these people from Arkansas or Texas or anywhere in the Bible Belt who never heard of the Upanishads, and they have this cosmic consciousness experience, and they realize that that's what happened to Jesus. They say, I'm Jesus, come back. Well, everybody says to them, you aren't Jesus. It's pretty obvious you're not Jesus. You're just Joe Dogs. Well, he says that's what they said about Jesus. He has a perfect argument, except they say you're not much of a Jesus. They say, all right, if you're Jesus, command that these stones be made bread. And he says, a wicked and deceitful generation seeketh for a sign, and there shall no sign be given.
I mean, the last couple of minutes is hilarious stuff. Yeah, I think that's the funny thing. And there is a talk where he talks about the Joker, and I think I may do a part about that. But it's a very interesting way to get a point across using humor, and a lot of the humor is just the the expectation of what is maybe proper or made it what is maybe the logical step, and then but those who are rooted in belief systems, there really is no logic. And so when you have a quip, the return of just using their own words against them, there's nothing that they can do to reply back, and that's why it's funny. Anyways, sorry, let's keep going.
Now, why talk about this? Is it interesting? Is it important for the human being to realize that in some sense of the word, whatever it means, he is God or one with God, as is plainly taught by the Hindus, hinted at by the Buddhists, only they don't like to put it out as a concept in case people will use the concept as an idol to hang on to. They want you to find out for yourself and not believe in it. And certainly the Taoists understand it, the Sufis understand it, a lot of people understand it. But so what?
And again, you can understand it. You don't have to believe. You don't have to take someone's word for it. You can experience this yourself. And you can be given signs to experience it. Heck, if you're even watching me, and what I've just said previously in my comments, you've already experienced that sign that you're actually watching me in a small channel of mine where and you're actually staying to listen to what I have to say, and not just go directly to a link and listen to yourself by yourself, which you should do anyways, is pretty amazing. And I think that's what when he talks about how so on, and I think he'll talk about it more, is when you're located and fixated on a region, or just say one aspect of consciousness, or maybe a religious control of that consciousness or that conscious state, such as say whether it's Catholicism, Protestantism, whether you're following Jewish faith or Muslim one, whatever, and that's all you study, that's all you know, and there's plenty more out there. It's as though you have, if you've gone fishing and you've only fished for one fish, say it's catfish, that's all you've ever fished for, that's all you ever caught, and you say, someone asks you, what's your favorite fish? What's the best fish to eat? And you're going to say catfish. And they go, what other fish have you eaten? Well, I haven't eaten any other fish, just catfish. Then how do you know that's the best fish you can eat? Well, it's the fish that I've caught and I've eaten, and it tasted really good, and it's my favorite fish, and it's probably the best fish to eat for everybody else. It's very similar to that, where you've got one experience and not a bunch of other experiences, and therefore that one experience is the correct one. You know, it's just ridiculous. isn't it? Okay. All I'm trying to say is, hey, if you want to experience something, you can ask around other people who've experienced it. And you're going to either have to believe that's what happened, or it's not, or that's the way it went, or that's the way it not, or it didn't happen. And then you're going to have to go out and try for yourself and see if, hey, was that person pulling my leg? Or is that person is like, yeah, okay, I'm going to go talk to that person and say, hey, I did it. And yeah, it's exactly the way you said it was, or whatever. And therefore, it's very important for you to go out and experience things for yourself.
Well, the importance of it is this, that to know that you are God is another way of saying that you feel completely with this universe. You feel profoundly rooted in it and connected with it. You feel, in other words, that the whole energy which expresses itself in the galaxies is intimate. It is not something to which you are a stranger, but it is that with which you, whatever that is, are intimately bound up. That in your seeing, your hearing, your talking, your thinking, your moving, you express that which it is which moves the sun and other stars. And if you don't know that, if you don't feel that, well, naturally you feel alien, you feel a stranger in the world, and if you feel a stranger, you feel hostile. And therefore, you start to bulldoze things about, to beat it up, and to try and make the world submit to your will, and you become a real troublemaker. So I feel also one reason why you become hostile is that feeling that you were just brought into this place, that your father and mother went up to some monkey business that they probably shouldn't have done, or it was bad rubber goods, and as a result of this, here you are, and you didn't ask to be here. Well, you always feel you can turn around and blame them. You can blame somebody. You can blame the government. You can blame the rascals. You can blame the cheaters. Always supposing you yourself aren't a rascal, which is long odds. You always can blame someone and say, I didn't ask for it. Take it away. And yet, very few people are all too ready to take it away. Camus said that the only serious philosophical problem is whether or not to commit suicide. And if you don't say take it away, what are you going to do? You've really got to assume responsibility for it. You've got to say yes to what happens. It's my karma. And that doesn't mean merely, there are many misinterpretations of the doctrine of karma. It's usually and popularly understood is that what happens to you, either fortunate or unfortunate, is the result of good or bad deeds in a previous life. Well, that's popular superstition. The real meaning of karma, the word in Sanskrit means simply doing. And if I say of an event it is your karma, it is saying it is your doing. So the exposition, a book which would expound karma, would be not so much a whodunit as a youdunit. But that seems fantastic. Now, therefore, what I propose we do is that we, instead of just ideologizing, we have a clinical experience. You know, in psychiatric school, in medical school, it's very usual for a doctor to bring a patient out in front of the students and talk with the patient. As a kind of demonstration, he says, I want you to recognize the difference between a psychopath and a manic depressive or a schizophrenic or something. They don't know what all these things mean. And especially the schizophrenia. And so he has a dialogue with the patient right there. So let us suppose that I'm the patient, and you are the students, and the doctors. And I suffer from what you would call the delusion that I'm God. And therefore, you might want to do something about me, or with me, or humor me, or ask me questions. And so I'm perfectly willing to submit to your examination and your treatment, and invite you to help yourselves.
When did you become God?
Now?
Will you marry me?
No. Yes.
God, do you sleep on your stomach or your back?
Sleeping is like politics. One sleeps on the right side, and then when you're tired of that, you sleep on the left. When you're tired of that, you sleep on your back, and when you're tired of that, you sleep on your stomach. And it is thus that the world goes round.
If you were God now, what were you yesterday?
Now,
How do you become God?
you don't become God.
Am I also God?
Yes.
Are we then the same person?
No.
What is God?
Remember, 3 persons but 1 God.
God, could you tell us a little about Satan?
Could I tell you a little bit about Satan? Yes. Although the matter is a little esoteric, but I told you all about it in the book of Job, where you will see that in the court of heaven, Satan is the district attorney. He is not, as Christians imagine, the enemy of heaven and the enemy of mankind. He's merely the person who sees the bad side of things and carries out the dirty work. And therefore, he saw Job and wondered whether Job really was as great a guy as he seemed to be, and suggested that God should appoint a committee of investigation to find out. And the committee did its work very thoroughly, but the case went against Satan, because it was proved in the end that Job was an honorable man. Now you notice that although we pay the salary of the district attorney, whenever there's a great criminal case before the public eye, people begin to take the side of the underdog. And the prosecutor always has less public sympathy than the defense, except in political trials. On the right hand of God, and you know the defense is always on the right hand of the judge in court, is our only mediator and advocate, which is the phrase referring to Jesus Christ our Lord. So there is the defense and there is the prosecution. And it is the function of Satan to be the prosecutor. There is a good deal more to it than that, because before all this started, as in a stage play, there was an arrangement in the green room before coming on stage in which certain things were understood, but that are only to be revealed when the curtain goes down at the end of the play.
Is Job God too?
Yes, but he doesn't know it.
God, why do you hide from the sight of so many?
Why do you hide? It's for the same reason you're hiding.
God, did you create man
Yes.
as a God?
Who else?
Man free will.
What?
Man free will.
Man has free will to the extent that he knows who he is. Not otherwise.
Where did you get free will from?
Where I got it from.
Does a woman have free will too?
Yes. To the extent that she knows who she is, yes.
If man has free will to know just what he is, and man is God, then you'd say that you are no more than any God in this room, or any man.
That is correct. I'm no more God than any of you.
Then you only have the power to know who you are.
Well, that is saying quite a bit, yes.
What does not God?
What is not God? There is nothing that is not God.
How do you learn who you are?
It's like waking up from a dream. After a while, one's experience begins to have what I would call a haven't we been here before feeling. Going round and round and round. And then you begin wondering, where am I going? And to answer that question, you have to try and find out what you want. And so I went into that very thoroughly. What do I want to happen? And, of course, as soon as you ask yourself that, you begin to fantasize. And our amazing technology is, of course, an expression of human desire, desire for power, for what we want to achieve. So I simply set myself to thinking through how far we could go. And so I soon found myself at a great push-button place, where I had a fantastic mechanism with buttons available for every conceivable thing I could wish. So I spent quite a bit of time playing with those. And science fiction wasn't in it. You know, you go going like that, and here is Cleopatra. And so on, you know, and then press this button, symphonic music in 4-channel sound, 16-channel sound, anything, you know, all possible pleasures are available. And when, you know, you're like everybody's dream of the Sultan in the palace, you suddenly notice there's a button labeled surprise. You push that, and here we are.
Is boredom a problem?
Yes, boredom is, of course, the problem. Boredom is the other side of creativity. And the energy of creation has as its, that is the yang, the yin side of that energy is called boredom. Everything, of course, is fundamentally yang and yin. If you understand that, you really don't need to understand anything else.
As God, what responsibility do you feel to ameliorate evil in the world?
As God, what responsibility do I feel to ameliorate evil in the world? I begin with the point that I am responsible for the way the world is. If I couldn't feel that, I'd have to blame somebody else. I'm not willing to do that, because I know that under various changing circumstances it might be appropriate for me to be as big a rascal as rascals have been. Now, as to improving the world is always improving. It may look to some people slow, but it's improving even when it is declining, because the world works in an undulatory process, like a wave. It goes up and it goes down, it goes up and it goes down. And it couldn't go up all the time, because if it did, we wouldn't know that that was up. So it goes down some of the time so that we can know when it goes up, because if we didn't know when it went up, it would be like being in a space where everything was light. There'd be nothing to write home about. There would be no black marks on the space, and so it would be like a piece of perfectly empty paper. Similarly, to be in a completely black space would also be a kind of unconsciousness with nothing to write home about, as there'd be nothing would make any difference. So therefore, if you're going to have black, you won't know that it's black unless you have some white, and if you're going to have white, you won't know that it's white unless you have some black.
I mean, that's the duality. You really can't know one without the other. And kind of reminds me of, there's a story of a man who was afraid of his own shadow and afraid of the sound of footsteps, and thus try to figure out, hey, how do I get away from this? So he started walking, and the shadow was still there following him, and the footsteps sounded close, and so he ended up running faster and faster, and no matter how fast he ran, the shadow always caught up to him, and the sounds always got louder, and then he ended up going into exhaustion, falling dead. And what he could have simply done was to go next to a tree and sit in the shade where no shadow can be cast onto him, because he's in a shadow. No shadow is cast within a shadow unless I guess there's a different light source, but if there's only one light source, such as the sun, therefore you're not going to have that shadow cast onto you. And so he couldn't hear the footsteps. All he had to do was sit down. So sit down by the shade of a tree rather than running around like crazy. Would have done the trick. Anyways, it's just something that popped into my head. Anyways, let's keep going.
Why do you teach us all to love one another? Because if we get to that point, there won't be any of these ups and downs. We'll have to tell you.
Correct, but that's not a teaching, it's a koan. A koan. A koan is a Japanese word for a spiritual problem used in Zen Buddhism, such as, what is the sound of one hand? And these problems are given to those who ask questions concerning their spiritual development. And sometimes, as St. Paul pointed out, commandments are given not in the expectation that they will be obeyed, but in the expectation that they will reveal something to those who hear them. That was St. Paul's comment on the whole Mosaic law. Yes, sir.
If we accept the peace.
What?
If we accept the peace, which I concede, that we are all God.
Yes.
What of the hereafter? Is there a heaven? Is there a purgatory? Is there a hell?
The hereafter is, of course, now. Because if you will examine it closely, there is no when else than now. And if you want to make hell of it, you can make hell of it. If you want to make heaven of it, you can make heaven of it. Purgatory, purgatory. It's all here. Always was, always will be.
Death.
What is death? Death is an undulation in consciousness. How would you know you were alive unless you'd once been dead? Yes.
You realize in the same way that Jesus is your God, why was it unnecessary for him to have material possessions and necessary for you?
It wasn't unnecessary for him to have material possessions. They said of St. John the Baptist that he was an ascetic, but of Jesus, this man consorts with gluttoners and wine-bibbers and comes eating and drinking. And when the lady Mary poured precious ointment on his feet and anointed him, they said the same thing that the members of the vestry say to the minister today. Why this great expense? Couldn't it all have been sold for much money and given to the poor?
But it's a problem.
It is a problem, sure. But you see, in many ways, when you get down to these very deep ethical problems, where there sure is no easy decision one way or the other, you must look at the problem from the point of view of an artist. Which way of doing this is in some sense greater? It may be better to go off with a bang than with a whimper. Let me see.
Are you God all the time? I mean, in consciousness all the time.
There is no time, my dear. It's always now.
During every event in space-time. At every precise moment in consciousness, are you
yes, if you put it
God?
that way, of course.
You are consciously God as an experiencing unit on this plane of experience.
Wait a moment, consciously, not necessarily, because that would spoil the fun.
That's what I'm asking.
If you press button surprise, you've pressed a button so that you forget who you are.
Right, so that you don't always know all the answers to a given problem.
Yes, that's perfectly true. This is called, in the Bible, kenosis. in St. Paul's epistle to the Philippians. He says, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, thought not equality with God a thing to be grasped, but humbled himself, and made himself of no reputation, and was found in fashion as a man, and became obedient to death." And so you get from this the kenotic theory of creation, held by some of the Greek fathers, that the creation of the universe is the self-emptying or self-forgetting of the Godhead. Yes, I think it's your turn now.
How does your concept of the creation of evil so that man could see how good it is differ from the old story of a man beating his head against the wall so he could feel how good it is when he stopped?
It's really rather like it. Because the universe is fundamentally a system which creeps up on itself and then says, "Boo!" And then it laughs at itself for jumping. And you see, every time it does it, it forgets that it did it before. So it never becomes a bore. Yes, the lady in red.
Can you make yourself into a point of consciousness and travel around the cosmos, such as Dr. Lilly was speaking of last night and talking about Satori?
Yes, but it isn't necessary to travel. The question is, can I make myself into a point of consciousness and travel around the cosmos and see things from all sorts of places? I say, yes, but it isn't necessary to travel. One is already there. In other words, I'm using your eyes where you are, like you're using mine. Just in the same way, my head is not my feet, it uses my feet. The head is very different from the feet. You couldn't possibly say the head and the feet are the same, but they are one organism.
They each have a soul.
Two.
What do you do about the boredom?
What do I do about boredom? Press button surprise.
Oh, it's always there.
Yes, always. Yes, the lady in purple here.
You talk about boredom. It seems to me, at least in my own case, and maybe many people, that one of the biggest problems in life is being forced to earn a living at something which is not what I would rather be doing. And I often wonder, is the answer to move somewhere and live on less money and do the thing that I would like to do, or must I resign myself, as many people have, to do the thing that gets me the bread, and then in my spare time somehow try to make up for the many days and weeks and years of this kind of path living? What is the answer?
Well, there are two sort of answers, one of which you've already indicated, which is to do with less and do what you want.
Would be more.
Which,
but if everyone did that, you know, those things, many of the things that we sort of accepted as part of life wouldn't get done.
I think the objection, if everyone did that, is rather like asking what would happen if everybody wanted to catch the 4 o'clock train from Grand Central to Westport. Or if all the molecules of air in this room were suddenly to congregate over in that corner. There is a bare chance that it might happen, but very low. Yes.
Would you say we're going around in circles trying to eliminate evil because we never will? There might not be any evil.
Yes.
Never eliminate it, so we're just playing games.
We are going round in circles. But you see, going round in circles, as you may have observed by looking at the sky, is what the universe is doing. You see, before.
As long as we recognize we're going around in circles, we're all right.
Yes. Yes, that's the thing. It's a dance. And when you dance, you don't dance to get somewhere.
It also brings me to the point of a circle. Just like at the number pi. We've so far never found it to have a repeated pattern. And every sequence of a circle becomes a surprise. You don't know what to expect. And that's a good thing. What's the point of doing something again and again if all you're going to get is the same result? We want to see what happens when you change a variable and something different occurs, and we're fascinated by it. Some people get fascinated by doing the same thing, getting the same results, but after a while it gets repetitive, it gets boring, and as great as it was the first time when we experienced it, maybe second, third time, it gets old. We know what we're going to see, we know what we're going to experience, and therefore why repeat it? We've got it. Maybe one day you forget a little bit of it and how you wanted to rewatch it, and you go ahead and do that and go, oh, I remember why I liked it. But what you're ultimately looking for is something similar to it, if that's something that you really liked, but something a little bit different and has its originality in that aspect. And anyways, let's keep going.
Yes, all right, but when you wake up, you turn the confusion into a dance. And so I go back to your question. What is the alternative to clearing out of the job you're doing? And to say doing with less but having more fun. Well, there are ways of making almost any activity into a dance. Supposing you had to drive a bus in New York, which is a very harrowing job in the ordinary way, you must not take seriously anything about it. This is the first rule. That it doesn't matter a damn if you don't get there on time, but it would be fun to go as fast as is consistent with safety. And therefore, you swing that bus, and you play things with the horn. You take the whole thing lightly, as if it is not serious. And this is the nature, say, in ritual, when you have a procession. Now, people who don't understand religion don't know how to make the right kind of processions. There are those who go a military march, and they don't understand it because their objective is to get there. There are those who dawdle like ducks, and they don't understand because they are trying to be dignified. On the other hand, there are those who walk as if they had already arrived. And this is the way kings walk. Because a king is the center, and he is always where it's at. Where it's at is where the king is, by definition. So, if you work in this way, people who are practicing meditation take up monotonous things for fun. And meditation is supposed to be fun. I hope John Lilly told you that this morning.
Sorry, I should have gone before. It reminds me of Dead Poets Society. Remember when Robin Williams asked his students to walk, and each walk their own way. They take their own stride. I just thought that was an interesting part. Now, I'll probably stop just shortly when he talks about the Mani Padme Hum. Anyways, let's keep going for that bit.
Well, you say you're going to do Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. You know, you can really have a gas doing that. And so that anything monotonous can be treated in the same way. This is one of the ways of overcoming boredom. Because boredom's the great problem for energy.
So, Om Mani Padme Hum, it was something I was researching earlier, which has to do with the it's like it's a calling out to a bodhisattva I think I have to relook at that, but it's something that you may want to remember because it's pretty interesting, and it's to point out all the interesting things that we can find out in experience, in how it resonates, and if it doesn't resonate with you, it's not going to. I mean, it's like hearing a joke. Sometimes you hear a joke, other people are laughing, you're not laughing. It wasn't funny for you, it's funny for other people. So everything has its own taste, its own resonance, and if it doesn't resonate with you, don't worry about it. Find something that does. Here we go.
The energy is always on the go. Yes, sir. Yes, the gentleman in the white shirt here.
Does it bother you to be called mythic sometimes by people who like the idea of your existence?
Mythic? No. Mythic is a great word. The question is, does it bother me to be called mythic? No. Myth is very powerful. Myth is fun. Myth is stories told to children. Everybody loves them. Yes, sir. What?
Is God omniscient?
Is God omniscient? Well, it depends what you mean by the word. A lot of people think that omniscience is like knowing everything that's in the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's not omniscience, that's intellectual elephantiasis. Now, you see, let me explain this question because it's always important. And when anybody announces that he or she is God, people say at once, well, will you tell us in millimeters the height of Mont Blanc? And I say, look it up in the encyclopedia, it's there. The thing is this. What we ordinarily call knowledge is the translation of life into words. And that is a very cumbersome process because if we had to translate the process into words every time we took a breath, we'd never get around to it. It takes so long to describe and think through the whole physiology of breath. Therefore, we do it without thinking about it. And I find that I'm shining the stars in just the same way. I mean, if you want it in words, it's going to take us a long time to get through them because words are strung out in a line.
Then I sense that internally we are, and we are all gods. How come as a god, since you have said that we are all gods, and therefore I am a god, how come I find such difficulties in recognizing, understanding, or finding peace and tranquility within myself?
How do you, if you are God, how do you find such difficulty in finding peace and tranquility in yourself? That's because you're looking for it away from the place in which you are. You are seeking it apart from the experience which you have at this moment. And you are regarding that experience and saying, that's pretty lousy, I'd like something better than that. But the trouble with that is that it splits you in two pieces. And once you're split in two pieces, you're lost. Because you've made a difference between the experience you are now having on the one hand and yourself who is having it on the other. And you wish you could get away from that experience. Now, the truth of the matter is you can't, because you are what you experience. It's a myth purely that there is some sort of experiencer who has the experience. You are what you know, because it is not I know something, there is simply a process called the knowing. You could say the knowing, like the world, has two poles, north and south. And so the knowing ball has the knower and the known, but only in that sense. Now, knowing changes. It changes itself. But if you try to stand outside it and change it, it'll be like standing outside your hand and trying to move your hand from outside. And so comes the difficulty. In other words, this would be the difficulty for God in the press button surprise situation, where you think you want something different from what you have. But if you do think that, you've got to ask yourself the question, what it is that you really want. This is the most fundamentally important question. And you will find, if you go into it very, very deeply, that you have it. Now, you may change your mind about it, but you do have what you want.
God, if this place caught on fire, I would find myself so scared that I wonder if I would also feel that I was God, and if I am God and scared, what do I do about that?
Well, one of the ways of not being bored is to scare yourself.
Yes.
Don't we all go to the movies just to be scared? We put certain limits on it, indeed, before we go and say well, this isn't really going to happen. It's only a play or a movie. And therefore, while we see the safe outline of the proscenium arch, back in the back of our minds as a sort of Hintergedanke, we know it's only a play.
I'm talking about when it isn't only.
How do you know it isn't? If you see, after all, the task of the actor on the stage is to come on so well that the audience thinks it's real, so that he has them crying, so that he has them shaking with fear, so that he has them sitting on the edges of their chairs. Well, that's just one ordinary Joe Doakes actor, but supposing the actor of the play is the real big actor. Wow, that play would seem real. And so that's what happens when the house catches on fire. Yes, lady in red. Yes, you're looking behind yourself. What is sleep? The seventh day. What? When is the seventh day? When you sleep. Yes.
Yes, God. The only reason I know that I'm God is because I take the responsibility for it.
Yes.
Doesn't that answer the lady's question about the fire?
Oh, yes, that also would answer it, yes. It's a question of taking responsibility for what happens.
What happens if you don't do anything about it?
If I don't do anything about the world?
The boredom.
The boredom.
What's through the boredom?
Well, that's another way. That's another way. You can explore boredom. You can bore into boredom and watch it. Sometimes when you're bored, that's the only thing to do. Because even for God, you can't lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. Because that is by nature of the definition impossible.
You said you would enjoy having a myth of you.
Yes, I think that would be fun. I mean, why else does one go on stage except to make myths? What?
Why not?
Again?
Excuse me, what did you say? What is my motivation for going on the stage? That is like asking, why is there a universe? Well, now, if you listened to George Leonard last night, George Leonard explained how children were befuddled by being taught to ask why about everything. Because you always look away from what you're asking about to its antecedents, and that won't lead you anywhere at all. Why am I here? And I answer that question. Then somebody says, well, why that? And then somebody says, well, why that? Why that? Why that? And you get back and back and back, and eventually you get tired of answering. And so fathers, when their children say, why, Daddy? Why? They say, oh, shut up and eat your lollipop. So, but what happens, you see, when we trace the causation of things into the past, it all begins to fade out in silence and no answer. Why? Because it didn't begin there. The universe begins now. It didn't begin in the past. And the past trails back from now like the wake of a ship.
If everything is God and there is no time except now, what is the role of chance?
If everything is God and there is no time except now, what is the role of chance? Chance pairs with order. We'll say randomness, we'll call it, and it pairs with order. And it is part of the nature of order. If you know what you mean by order, you know that you mean contrast with randomness. And if you know what you mean by randomness, you know that you mean contrast with order. So if you want to have order, you must have randomness, and vice versa. Yes?
Did you have this much charisma before you discovered your true nature?
Yes, but it came out in a different way. Yes.
I think there's a sort of danger here, though the riddles are funny, and if you had time enough to think each one through, they'd be very profound. There's a certain danger of everything and everyone being God, because if you've really found yourself as God, then you know that certain things that you, as God, have created that don't personally affect you, you create for a reason, you stay out of them, and you aren't a do-gooder. But if you think you're God, and then you try to go into too much social action and change the evils of this world, you end up hurting yourself and a lot of people, and you're playing God, and you're not really being God.
Well, I admit to you, my dear, that this is a very, very dangerous conversation. And that I thoroughly agree with, but we didn't come here, did we, to play it safe. All profound ideas and profound questions are dangerous. It is dangerous to go into science, as we all know too well. It is dangerous to go into medicine. It's dangerous to go into writing, because the pen is often mightier than the sword. And so I don't think we should withdraw from certain things because they're dangerous. But I entirely agree with you that if I were, as it were, in the spirit of God to go about social reform, I would be failing to realize the construction of my own universe, which is that when you interfere with it, you've got to know exactly how you're interfering. Otherwise, the most amazingly unexpected things will happen. So when people ask for miracles, they don't realize what the miracles involve. I mean, if I turned the microphone into a rabbit, it's altogether possible that you might drop dead, because those events might be connected.
Did you ever study with Carl Jung?
Did I ever study with Carl Jung?
Work with him?
I didn't study with him. I knew him, and I read a lot of his writings. Yes.
What's the notion of watching yourself, like watching your boredom, or being aware of yourself, imply that there's a separation somewhere?
It does in a way, yes. And it depends how you're watching. There is a very interesting thing that comes up in this respect with regard to the Bhagavad Gita and to the Yoga Sutra, where they talk about the witness. There is, as it were, behind our ordinary self with its emotions and involvements, a witness self that does nothing more than perceive what happens. And this is the Atman, or the Purusha, which is not involved. And some of you, no doubt, especially in times of crisis, have suddenly discovered this sort of witness center behind everything that just isn't involved. Most terrible things can be going on, but the witness is impassive. Now, when we go into these states, we've got to be very careful of our descriptive language, because the descriptive language makes the witness seem something apart from what is happening in such a way that if we want to become really sort of schizzy and catatonic about things, we can always be withdrawn and go in and identify ourselves with a solitary and uninvolved witness who is merely a hangout for the ego, as when the police raid a house in which there are burglars. And the burglars know they'll be caught if they're on the ground floor, so they go up to the first floor. So then the police come up to the first floor, they're up to the second, finally they get to the roof, where the open sky and the infinite. And in this way, this was why the Buddha did not teach about the Atman, the real self within us, because he knew people would use the real self as a hideout for the ego. And so when, say, Krishnamurti tries to explain this, he doesn't talk about the witness. He talks about awareness, and people say to him, but who is aware? What is aware? And he seems a little sticky in his answer here, because what is the matter is that the people asking the question are bewitched by grammar. They are using a language in which it is part of the grammatical convention that the verb always have a noun subject. Now, how on earth do verbs get started by nouns? I ask you. How can a thing start a process? Surely, this was really the same problem Descartes was wrestling with when he tried to find out how spirit could influence matter, or how mind could influence body. Because everybody knows that all proper ghosts walk straight through walls without disturbing the bricks. So how can the ghost in the machine, as Koestler put it, the soul in the body, how can it do anything to the body? There's no connection. Two different realms. The point is, when we're talking about this awareness, what we call thought, feeling, sensation, emotion, we could say in a very clumsy way is it's aware of itself. It's the very nature. There wouldn't be sensation without awareness. You don't have to have something which is aware of it, any more than you have to have a thing called lightning which does something called flashing. The flashing is the lightning. And so awareness is the one who's aware of it. Could say this awareness. If I say I am aware, the word I, as William James suggested, is simply a word of position, like this or here. Awareness here. And your awareness there. Yes, sir.
It's like one great koan that we're all dealing with before.
Yes, life is like one great koan. No, death is not the solution. It has no solution. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. You see, the thing is like this. This is what is hard for Westerners especially to understand. I said, if you understand the yang and the yin, you don't need to ask any further questions. And all you I Ching buffs ought to know this by now. What is not a component of Western common sense is that nothing is something. Now that may sound a little contradictory, but I think I can explain it. We treat nothingness as if it were ineffective, as if it wasn't really important at all. And yet, when we look out at the night and we see all these stars in space, try and imagine what the heavens would look like if there weren't any space. Then obviously there wouldn't be any stars. I mean, you could think that they would all be jammed together in a lump. There are various objections to that. How would you see the edge of the lump and know it was a lump without space around it? Furthermore, we know when we investigate the constitution of matter physically that at the atomic level there's more space in something than there is anything else. Most of it is empty, and which led a physicist at the Argonne lab at the University of Chicago, who had become a little nutty. He was so impressed with the emptiness of matter that he went around in the most enormous padded slippers in case he should fall through the floor. So now what the point I'm making is this. If space is essential to solid, it's perfectly obvious then that nothing is essential to something. If you can't have something without nothing, it means nothing is pretty powerful stuff. Because something comes out of it. Like that. It's a dogma of Western thought expressed in the Latin phrase ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing comes nothing. But that's not so. Out of nothing comes something. Now you would say, well, if something comes out of nothing, there must be some kind of mystery inside nothing. It must have a secret structure of some kind. I mean, there must be sort of electrical goings on. This is the trouble they have about cosmology. How could this world generate? Could it just be out of free-floating hydrogen? No, it's a much simpler idea than that. It comes out of real, solid nothing. It's so simple. Look, if you listen, you see, you live in a world where there's only sound for a moment. You'll hear every sound coming out of silence. Where do these sounds come from? They come out of silence. Suddenly, boing. And you can accustom yourself to seeing light doing the same thing. You can open your eyes and see all this world emerging out of nothing, boing, like that, and fading off into the past. So that's what the future is unknown, because the future is zero. And everybody who tries to know it, and that's the whole endeavor of, you see, trying to be God. You don't need to try to be God. You are. But if you try to be God, it means you don't know you are. And therefore you try to know and dominate the future. And you believe prophets and things like that. Well, the prophecy is simply contaminating the future with the past, projecting what we know upon the unknown. And that's why really things like astrology, although interesting, are rather ridiculous. Because if you know the future, there's no surprise for you. A completely known future is past. You've had it. Yes.
Where the future and the past come together, it seems to me there isn't anything there. There is no now, really. It may seem very philosophical, but it seems like we don't exist. How could we exist? There's no now to exist. If the past and the future come right together, where is that place in between? How long is it?
There are two answers to that question. This is a real fun question. I love it. The question is about now. He's saying, really, there is no now. There is the future and the past come together, and the future turns into the past, and it goes, blip, and it's gone like that. So, in no time at all, the future has become past. And so we get this frantic feeling. Where did it go? Well, let's take the small view, first of all. The now is infinitely short, and yet it's the only thing that is. In that case, this whole world is an illusion. It doesn't really exist. So, when the king, the Emperor Akbar, once was feeling a little sorry for himself and asked his jeweler, he said, make me a ring that will restrain me in prosperity and support me in adversity. And so the jeweler made him a ring and gave it to the emperor, and he saw written on it, it will pass. Now the other side of the matter is this, that this short now is an illusion of the clock. We make our second marks on clocks as thin as is consistent with visibility. And therefore we always think of the present as crossing the hairline. Tick! That's too long, see? How short can you get? See? But really the present isn't like that at all. I mean, everything is right. There is nowhere else but now. Everything that happens is happening now. Well, it's like your field of vision. Your field of vision isn't just a point of light. Your field of vision is an oval. And it isn't fuzzy at the edges. It just ceases to be at the edges. But there's plenty of room in it to see something move across. So in your field of time, your now, there is enough now to include a phrase of music. If there weren't, you wouldn't be able to make out melodies because there'd just be instantaneous notes with no connection between them. You would never hear intervals. So now is a big slobby thing. But it comes out of nothing. Yes, lady is standing by the pillar.
So this is the great thing about it is that whole part with nothing and something is that everything was just one continuous thing with nothing in between it, it would just be a continuous thing. We wouldn't be able to experience a lot of these things such as movement and I guess, yeah, you would just call it movement. Because, say you just continually play a piano and you're continually pressing a key with no pauses. It's just going to be one big transition without any space between it, space of silence or space of reverberation. It should be all right. You may have to refresh, Kathy. And the importance of silence is to experience what just passed in a way, and to be able to focus in on what's coming next. And same thing with a lot of the space here. It's just to move around and get to the next point, because if we were just on one continuous monotony, we wouldn't be able to experience differences or have any surprises. There was something that was coming up in my mind while he was talking about it, but I am forgetting right now, and which is why I should be pausing to comment, because it's about what my thoughts are. I don't know what my thoughts will be. I could have I could collect my thoughts and while going through this and record afterwards and present my thoughts that way, but that has less spontaneity, and it's like writing in a way. I'm sure a lot of people have experience with writing. Now, the thing about writing is you have to let what comes to pass, it will pass, just flow through you, because that's where your creativity is coming through, and you're taking the time to slow it down or just to pause just long enough so you can put it down on paper. But you'll notice that sometimes you don't like the way that the wording is done, the details, you want to add some type of composition, whatever, where you would learn in school how to write. But in that case, it's not really telling the story. You're learning the techniques, but you're not necessarily letting that creativity go through and tell that story that you want told. And you'll notice that, and I notice that quite often, when I go back and I reread it, I'm thinking, okay, I'll change this to this and this to that. That might be a little bit better. But then that changes the whole story. Your creativity that you had is just thrown out the door. And now you're just refining it to basically to be more similar to what others would experience and agree with, even though that original creativity that was there, that was flowing through you, that is a big surprise because you weren't really thinking about the outcome. But now that the outcome is been shown, you want to edit it. Now that's fine. That could be done, but it's going to be based off of when you edit it yourself of your original work. You're going to refine it to something where you've experienced before, but in a certain way that you enjoy that experience. So other people may not like it as much, and but the thing is, you'll like it because you changed it to the way of something that you've had similar experiences with that you enjoyed. But I think a lot of great writers, people who write, and that a lot of people like, they don't necessarily write for themselves. They're usually writing for someone else, and that they don't really stop. They let the words come out. They let the writing speak for itself. They may let other people edit it, and they could either take the editor's changes or not. But basically, it's don't let the flow stop you, because it's like that in a lot of things, not just writing. Whether it's sports competition, while you're going through the motions of something, you don't change midway and go, hey, I should probably done it the other way. And so the next time it happens and you're expecting something like that similarly that happened in the past to happen in the future, and thus you're going to prepare for it. But the thing is, that situation may never come up. So you're just going, hey, this is close enough, so I'll try it. And it doesn't work very well. So a lot of it is instinctual. It's being prepared for the unpredictable. So imagine you are a fighter or a martial artist, whatever. and you prepare for everything that could happen, and you have a response for everything that could happen. Or on the other hand, you have someone who prepares for anything that could happen, but he's not aware of what could happen, thus he's always prepared for the unpredictable. I think that person would be much better off knowing what's going to happen and how he's going to handle it, and reacting to it, than the person who's prepared for something that should be coming but doesn't, because then therefore the unpredictable has got him in a bind. Anyways, it's starting to get a little bit messy, huh? All right, let's keep going.
So the question is there then no need for man to seek for a meaning in his life? Not only his life, but the life of the universe. Right. No, there is no need to seek for a meaning. Meaning, I use the word in rather a definite way, and for me, meaning is a function of signs, and particularly of words and symbols. Meaning is the referent of words, as when we take the word water, the meaning of it is something drinkable, whereas the sound water is not drinkable. So therefore, if we ask life to have a meaning, we look for something other than life to be that meaning, and therefore we reduce life to being mere words and mere symbol. Now, of course, you may use the word meaning in a less precise way and say, now, although the music of Bach has no meaning in the sense that it is not like the music of Tchaikovsky, designed to imitate natural events and noises, nevertheless it has meaning in the sense that it enchants us, the patterns of it ravish us in the same way as abstract patterns in an arabesque. That's a little different sense of the word meaning. And yes, I would say that life has that kind of meaning, but you don't seek it, because if you seek it, you lose it. I see the process of life as an essentially musical process which has no meaning except itself. It is going round in circles, like we love to spin in circles when we're dancing. Like children love to spin around in circles till they get dizzy. That's fun. And so the articulation of wonderful patterns is the meaning of life. If you seek for meaning, now this applies to all seekers, I'm sorry, growth seekers, but seeking's all right. I mean, it's a free country. But it invariably takes you away from what you're looking for. Because every search supposes I will find it later, not now, in the next moment, that somehow by some gimmick, by some exercise, by some process of transformation, I will later discover what I want. This is postponement, yes.
I do not agree with you, or partly agree to disagree.
Yes.
Because I feel that it's much more profound than that. And that if you do have if you do seek meaning, it doesn't take away from life, it gives to life. And it gives it much more meaningful and profound thing. That's all I can think of.
Well, this is a matter of words, my friend, because you may think that dancing is superficial, whereas I think it's profound. Yes. And so on. And I suggested two meanings of the word meaning, one of which is merely reduces life to being symbolic of something else, something always beyond. Then I'm going to ask, what's the meaning of that? And then we get into that infinite regression of questions. I feel that instead of getting into these infinite regressions of what is beneath, what is behind, look, it's right out in front of you now. And when you catch on to that, now gets very profound. I mean, it's the moment when nothing becomes something. And I don't see how much profounder than that you can get.
Hi, Bob. He says, too much of life is now in my rearview mirror. I can't even watch Blade Runner anymore. These questions give me too much anxiety these days. Rearview mirror is just what's behind. It's not necessarily what's past. And life isn't what's behind you or what was. It's what is now. I mean, you're not dead. You're still alive. So that doesn't mean your life is behind you. It's still there. It's in front of you. And I think a lot of people get stuck, and that's fine. People get stuck. And I think a lot of this setup is with our current worldly caste system, or whatever you might want to call it, is where you wake up, go to work 9 to 5, maybe even longer than that, go back home, get something to eat, turn on TV, go back to sleep, rinse and repeat, for something with money that is controlled by a system that has its own sinkhole, where you are that money that you earn gets taken away in order to get stuff that you need. You put that, you give that away in order to get something, and you're looking for something to happen in the future. And the future keeps coming on with hindrances and unknown randomness of occurrences. No one's going to know what's going to happen next. And you plan for it, you save for it, and therefore that is going to be your money for what happens that's not happening. If nothing happens, then you're going to go and use that for something that you are planning on. And when you are planning on something else happens. And to get you in that same process of, oh man, I just wasted all my time just doing the same thing over and over again, and what is that the meaning to life? Or is your meaning of life to keep gaining, keep trying to get more of these material possessions, which doesn't really change your life, your lifestyle. It changes your moments of your life, but it doesn't allow you to bring something on that's new and different, because in order for you to keep getting the same thing or getting something different materially, you need to keep going on with your doing. And in order to change all that, if you want to change something where, okay, the meaning of life is not about material possessions, so let's let go of the material possessions and let's see what the meaning of life provides us. And so you go and you do something different. You may go and relinquish your high-paying job. You may go out to a state or a country that's kind of remote, and you experience that, and you find that the meaning of life is, well, finding something more meaningful. So what's more meaningful? That's something that you have to come up with, that you have to find. You might find meaning in having a family. That's a big one. You might find meaning in exploring on your own places that you've never been, meeting people, exploring cultures. That might be meaning. It might be going out there and just finding people to experience things with, joining clubs and so on. I mean, it can be really profound. It could be really simple. It could just be just the meaning of meaninglessness. You can become just an aesthetic and just go to a nunnery or something like that, become a monk or a priest, and just focus on something very simple. And the meaning of that would just be the simpleness of living simply. Anyways, we are almost done, so I'll probably go off on a little bit more of commentary and thoughts afterwards. All right.
Yes.
But isn't hide and seek the sort of the essential game, and seek seeking fun in itself, even if you never find.
Oh, yes, I'm telling, I agree with. Seeking can be fun, but it won't get you to what you're looking for. You see, it's a way, seeking is a way of postponing finding. Let's put it off. You see, children on a hot day, they're terribly thirsty. And they say, let's get an ice cream soda. Another kid says, no, let's get thirstier. So when we finally get the ice cream soda, it'll be a real song. This is the principle of postponement. And everybody who is questing, who's practicing yoga and Zen meditation, all that kind of thing, is putting off that ice cream soda.
Well, then, if that's the case, what do you propose?
What do I propose? Nothing.
I don't think that you needed it just quite that way, because then you will say nothing is something, and then we'll go around in a day. But if you really believe that, then there would be no echelon society. After all, we all are either whether it's doing something or thinking something. We definitely are not just feeling that we're going to sit and let everything happen to us. Why did I come here? Or why did anyone come here today?
Yeah, but I mean, look here. When you ask always, why did you come? I repeat, that is a barren question. Why did you do it? Why did this happen? It goes a question that peters out. So this is not important. What is important, surely, is this immediate now. Not why are we here, but what are we here? Unless you live in the eternal now, consciously, you have no use for plans. Because people who live in the future, or for the future, when their plans come off, they're not there enjoying them. They're planning for another future. They never catch up with themselves.
Oh, I want to keep going, but oh man, that is great because yeah, that's what we're seeing now in our current society, is that everyone is planning off their future by keep working towards it, and yet, look, there's a sinkhole for people where whether they know it or not, is that they keep planning their future for what they want. What do they want to do? What you've got 2 weeks of paid vacation. You say you're working at some company. Maybe you only have 1 week of paid vacation. Wow, 1 week of paid vacation where I could pretty much do whatever I planned on doing. What am I going to do? So you plan on something, you go and do it, yet something happens. Like the company that you work for before you plan on your vacation, well, they ran out of money, so you're gonna have to go and find a new job. So your paid vacation is off. So you can be like, oh man, well, that sucks. I am definitely not enjoying that week that I planned of, because that week that I planned on doing whatever I want with what I planned, now I have to go look for a new job, which I didn't want to do, and therefore your future is still out there, and you're hoping for it. Now imagine fast forward 20 years, you got that 1 week of vacation that you've always planned on that you never got to do. So one day you go, screw it, I'm just gonna do it. I don't care if I don't have a job, I don't care if I don't have enough money, I'm just gonna go out there and do it. And then you go out there and you do it and you go, oh man, that was okay. It wasn't as fun as I expected, but I just lost about 20 years of finding out that it wasn't what I expected, and it wasn't something that I really enjoyed. So instead of planning all that into a small time frame, I guess, where you could find enjoyment, enjoy yourselves now. Find things that you enjoy now and do it. Your future is now, right? If you plan on the future where you're not going to enjoy something that you're doing now to enjoy something in the future that may never come, you may never get there. You may never be able to do it. Who knows what's going to happen? All right, so let's finish.
Can you not put your future in the now?
Yes, in that sense. Of course. When you make plans, you plan now. And that can be a gas, making plans. But for goodness sake, do it in the now spirit, rather than, as it were, oh, if I can't wait till that happens. Because then if you're in I can't wait spirit, you just bolt life, like somebody swallowing food so fast they can neither taste nor digest it. Yes?
Aren't there really two different ways you can search for something? The second one almost isn't a search. There's the way of intellectually trying to figure it out and plan it, and there's the way of experiencing it. And part of your experience would be taking in what would happen in the future. And that second way isn't a bad search, it's just really being.
Yeah.
So isn't there a type, that's the type of searching for meaning that would be okay, that would be fulfilling?
Well, yes. There is the searching in a spirit that the search is more fun than the finding. You know that? When you're traveling, for example, going somewhere is the real joy of it often. And that's the fallacy of the jet plane, that it abolishes distances between places, and all places which have a distance abolished between them become the same place. So there's no point going to Tokyo if it's already Los Angeles. I mean, this is the thing. Yes, there's a hand here.
Is it possible that in the word seek that we are trapped in a Western word, that it seems as though you're projecting it as going down a road, as though we were going out to look for something?
Well, the comment is about seeking. Is it necessarily a road, like taking a road? Or is seeking also conceivable as readiness to receive? Well, of course, the road isn't a merely Western analog. It's a very common metaphor. The path and the stages of the path, the steps of the path, are used in both East and West. But the Chinese word for the way is Tao, T-A-O. And the path is what we're looking for. In the Chinese sense, you see. The Tao is the works, baby. That is the which than which there is no whicher. And the to be in harmony with the way, to be on the way, you see. But the Tao isn't going anywhere. And that's like when the Chinese poet is wandering in the forest. And he looks at the clouds and he says, where are they going? No one knows. Where does this path lead? No one cares. I'm wandering on and on in a great forest without thought of return. That is poetic feeling to the Far East, both to the Japanese and the Chinese. They call that spirit yugen. And it's the mysterious going nowhereness of things, the wandering spirit. So that sort of seeking is different from anxiety to get something in the future which you don't have now. Yes, sir.
What's the difference between just existing in now and experiencing everything and not seeking anything and pure hedonism?
Well, pure hedonism is a quest for pleasure. The hedonist, in that sense of the word, would not live in the eternal now if he found it not altogether enjoyable. He would then read romances of the past or fantasies of the future to get away from now, because what he's looking for is pleasure. But when we look for pleasure, you see, we split ourselves. We divide ourselves from pleasure in seeking it. And in trying to get away from pain, we divide ourselves from pain, not realizing that that's what creates pain, is the division of experience, so that the wholeness of experience is broken and we are disintegrated. Yes, sir.
Before you made the distinction between nothingness and something, that nothingness really was a category. Isn't that just an intellectual fallacy? There's no such thing as any categories if you're really living on an experience level.
That's true. Categories do not really exist in nature. Categories are like taking a network printed on cellophane and putting it over a picture of a forest, and then numbering the trees according to what squares they're in on the cellophane. That's categorization.
Then, if you believe that, then that category of nothingness really is empty, because there's no such thing as that category out there.
Oh, I said it was thoroughly empty.
Would you?
But wait a minute, it isn't. It is a category in the sense that something is its limit. So it has an edge, and that's what you see in the Yang-Yin diagram.
Would you comment on China and the recent developments?
No, I don't want to comment on China at the moment.
Would you repeat that about pain, what you just said?
Yes, what I was trying to say about pain is this. We are in a split relationship with the contents of our experience. The knower and the known. Then there is the knower is opposed with a known called pleasure and tries to identify with it. The knower is confronted with a known called pain and tries to be disentangled from it. But it is this very split. It is trying to get away from pain that makes pain painful. It's as if you got caught in some brambles and you pulled away from them and they just dug more deeply into your skin. You would have to go the other direction to let the brambles out. You'd have to go into the bush. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, we're getting close and I can't seem to stop. All right. So pain and pleasure. Now there's physical pain, there's emotional pain, there's physical pleasure, there's emotional pleasure, and I think it is by trying to split yourself from one, but only having one side of it is I think a lot of people try to get that, and that's where they split themselves. They distance themselves from who they truly are and how they want to be, and that's where you get into relationships where you're not yourself in order to be with someone else who wants you as someone you are not. And that's where you get into some trouble. Or you want someone to be who you want them to be where they are not, and they don't want to change, type of thing. So a lot of people will experience someone that they want to be with, have a relationship with, and it didn't work out. And there were some good moments, some happy moments, some very much a lot of pleasure, whether it's physical or emotional. And then that relationship ends, and whether you have this emotional pain, and you go, well, I don't like this emotional pain, so I'm never gonna have another relationship, and therefore you will never have that pleasure that you've gotten from that relationship. So therefore, while you may never have that pain occur, you will never also have that pleasure. And therefore you're trying to have one and the other. It's not going to work. You're going to have neither. All right. Let's keep going.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's only a metaphor. But the point is that as we keep up this distinction of the knower from the known, we're always running away and wanting to change experience. And there's a fundamental, therefore, escape. In every project to transform consciousness, there is an escape from what is. And when you realize you cannot get away from what is, not should you, not might you, but you can't, then at that point when you realize you can't get away from what is, there's nothing left to you but to watch it. And then for the first time you're taking a good look at your real self. Because your real self is a happening. The Chinese call it zhiran, nature, what is so of itself. And that's you. And you is this happening. And it's everything that you're aware of is your happening, and a good deal more besides. You're not aware of all of yourself. Like you don't have an immediate vision of the contents of your stomach. You haven't got eyes down there. Yes, sir.
Now, what is your criterion for heaven now or hell now? Are you juxtaposing with beauty as opposed to ugliness?
Yes. At least, you see, I know when I'm confronted with the beautiful, or when I pass into the beautiful, as I know when I pass into the ugly. When I try to say what these are or what my criteria are, all I'm doing is I'm trying to find a form of words that will apply to all my different sensations of beauty or of ugliness. The problem is not to know what is beautiful, but to know how to put it into linear language. That's where the complexity comes in. We very well know what is beautiful, but when we come to talk about it, the words disappear. I mean, here's our fundamental problem, because you see, in a certain way, what we mean by sense is God. Now, it isn't, not that God doesn't have a sense of nonsense. Look at giraffes, for heaven's sakes. But it's this old thing. One form is, could God make a stone so heavy that he couldn't lift it? That is an equivalent question to saying, could God make a dead body into a living body? That is the same question as asking, could a dead body be a living body? And that is the same question as asking, could the head be the feet?
Don, earlier though, you did say that everybody alive had been dead before.
Yes, that's a different matter.
I'd like to enlarge on that a little bit, so I can understand.
Now look, one of the most interesting meditations is to think about death and imagine what it would be like to go unconscious and never become conscious again. That is, as Keats said of the Grecian urn, it teases you out of thought. And while you think of that, and say, good heavens, fancy never coming to again, you get a mirror image thought, which is about your birth. My goodness, you came to without ever having gone unconscious. That's pretty weird. And it seems to me that if that happened once, it can happen again. Now what happens is this. When you die, boing, there's a blank. And the next thing you know is, wah, just as you did it before. Because every I that comes into this world is I. It's me. It's you. On this level, it is diversified. But yet I is always central. Everyone feels he's the center of the universe. And on the surface of a sphere, any point may be the center of the surface. So, here it is. Every time it happens, it's me. So I should worry about reincarnation. Yes.
According to the Sufi doctrine, if you reach the third level, you're supposed to have the choice. You don't have to be reincarnated. Do you feel that? Is that so, God?
All wise action is never the result of choice.
Say again.
Wise action is never the result of choice.
Implies logic.
Huh?
Does choice imply logic?
Choice implies ignorance, indecision. When you know what to do, you don't choose, you do it.
What question is logic ignorance?
You about love.
What?
What question could we ask you about love?
What question could you ask about love? What is love? Love is not a what. Love is the energy of the world. And nobody can say what that is. If anybody were to say what God is or what the energy of the world is, he would be talking nonsense. Now, there are times when it is important to talk nonsense, because we can discover the energy of the universe through nonsense. When you say you take a sound that really doesn't mean anything much, like that's the energy of the universe going. Dig it. See, as you listen to sound, that's why music is a marvelous support for meditation. Digging sound, listening, just listening to that hum. There goes the energy of the universe. See? What is it? That's what it is. See? Yeah.
Would you say that we meditate for the sake of the meditation?
Yes.
In other words, not because if I meditate at some future date, something may or may not happen.
Yeah, that's
Because
right.
the act of
Then if you do that, it isn't meditation.
Right.
Meditation is centered in the here and now. Done for some other reason, it isn't meditation. It stops dead right there. What is Satori? Satori is any kind of aha eureka phenomenon, only specifically applied to discovering who and what you are. The clear light is that. You say, I saw the light. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was the physical hallucination of a flash. It may mean suddenly everything becomes transparent. That may be a way of feeling it. I mean, it's just as the problem vanishes and you stop asking the question.
Can you risk being God outside of this social situation?
What do you mean, risk it? The problem is no risk being God. The risk is being human.
All right, that was Alan Watts Q&A with God, where a lot of the time was spent with the people in the audience getting to ask him questions, and he gets to answer it. And I thought it was good. It is entertaining, Kathy. I think one of the things that I was remembering, even though it's not it didn't necessarily have to do with anything that went on with the Q&A by Alan Watts, is just kind of like how there's something out of nothing and nothing out of something, that there is always a usefulness of something that is not useful. So it's useless. A lot of people will say, oh, this thing is useless. But it's only useless for what you plan to do with it, or what you are doing with it, which makes it useless. But it's not necessarily useless in the span of things. There is nothing in this world that we know of that is completely useless. There's a usefulness for anything, and to deem something as useless is to pretty much be ignorant of what it can be useful for. So it's like, okay, I need to hammer in this nail. So you get a piece of paper and you try to hammer the nail with a piece of paper, and you're going, oh, this paper is useless. Well, that's not what that piece of paper can be used for. It has many uses. But you want to drive that nail in, yeah, it's probably not going to work very well. There's probably other things that can be more useful than that piece of paper. So what is more useful to you at that particular moment? And what can you find? What can you find? And if you can't find it, search for it. All right, let's see. Yeah, a lot of these issues is pretty good. I think if you put in a lot of thought to a lot of things, apply some logic, or just the reverse idea of it, or just a different outlook into a situation, and what can you come up with? If you can't come up with it, and you just are at a impasse, that's fine. That means you still got time to figure it out, if there's such a thing as time. Now, on the other hand, if you don't know what to do, how to choose, what to think, how to act, and you only know one way to do it, and that's the only way you're going to do it, and you don't think you have any other option, but that's just the way that things happen for you, well, I think you're also going to be stuck, because that same way of doing something in different situations isn't always going to work. It'd be almost the reverse of having a hammer to drive in that nail, but then you're gonna have different things. You're gonna say, hey, this hammer is awesome because it works with this nail. Let's see what else I can hammer. And then you can hammer a lot of things with that hammer, but it may not be as useful as just hammering nails. Like if you try to hammering in, say, a screw, probably one kind of defeats the purpose of having a screw using that hammer. If you're using a hammer for cutting up things, it's not going to be effective because there's no sharp edge. Anyways, it's a lot of good thought into certain things, and not to restrict yourself in any sense or to be restricted by those of others, in which ground do they have to say what you are or what you are not. You are who you are, and if they deem that you are unfit to be who you are, and they're going to do something to you, and where is that right? Overseeing, not overseeing, given authority to make you what you are not. You see where I'm coming from? And I think a lot of it also goes with freedom. And someone's saying, hey, it's the law. You should abide by the law, or it's illegal. It's like, who made that law? What was that law for? Who came up with that? Who's saying I should not do it? And if I do it, who's going to claim responsibility saying, hey, you should not have done that? And then and it keeps going back. And it's like, well, look, when we're in the situation, when we're born, we don't get to choose who our parents are, as far as we know. We don't get to choose whether our parents are rich or whether they are living in the United States as opposed to China. There's a lot of things we don't get to choose, and when we are brought up, we are in a society of not our choosing. So when does it get to be our choice? Our choice is always now. So if we want a choice to live in a society that we want to live in, we have to make that choice to live in that society, but make our own choices. Because I'm not going to live by the choices dictated by my parents. I'm not going to live my life dictated by choices proposed by people I don't know or I've never even met, who've made laws or legislation that I had no choice in making. I had no agreement in making. And even if I did have a choice, it didn't factor in. So therefore, where is freedom to you? Is freedom doing things along the lines of boundaries proposed by others, or is it to go to wherever you want to go, boundless by any boundaries, but respecting other people who have their own boundaries that hopefully you respect and they respect yours? So it's kind of that whole aspect of why laws were set up and legislation set up in the first place. Hey, let's make an agreement. Let's not do this to each other. And if you do this to each other, let's prevent that from happening. And so if no one's doing anything to anyone else, and that is something that people don't want people doing, it doesn't seem to make sense. Because, hey, you're not bothering me, so why should I have the authority to put you away or take something away from you? It didn't do anything to me, so there has to be some grievance upon someone. But if it's just a grievance of, hey, you're saying this, doing this, it doesn't affect me, but it affects me maybe emotionally, or that someone out there is doing something like that when I don't want them to do that, that doesn't really affect them. It doesn't take anything away from them. They shouldn't have to be affected by it. They can ignore it. It's not something that is bothering them unless they are bothered by it just by thinking of being bothered by it. And that's where we're starting to go and seeing how far can we set this boundary upon everyone else. It's like, hey, that's bothering me. I think you should have to pay a fine. It's like, I don't know who you are. I've never met you. And what? I mean, if no one's forcing you to listen to me or read my words, and if you're offended by it, I'm sorry. That's you being offended by it. I did not place that offense onto you. That is of your own doing, type of thing. So, is that illegal? Is that unlawful? Is that something that should be stopped? How can that be stopped? Everyone's going to offend someone naturally. Heck, even that thought or offense is an offense to me. And therefore, that we're in this impasse. So, what is exactly authority? And if you don't like the society that we're in, then what is the society you would like to be in? Are you going to move, or are you going to change what things are? Or is it just going to be you living your life? And if society deems that how you live your life is outside the bounds of society and therefore not allowed, then there's a problem, isn't it? Now, what are people going to do with that problem? Are they going to commit some type of violence to you, which is either physical or maybe it's just emotional? Emotional as in financial, but that could also be a physical burden. Are they going to take something away? Are they going to take you away? And is that something that you would allow you to do to others? Or are you doing that to others and you just want to not be affected by it? Anyways, there's so many things to talk about. It really spurs on the thought process of what freedom is and the authorities and what is an authority, and what is the right way to think, what is the right way to say, does it matter? And also, a lot of the authorities today seek control of having your authority, of you not having an authority at all. You are just a small piece of the system, and whoever is in a position of power has an authority, yet how are they in that position of power? How did they get there? Is it from other people? Is it from you? If you didn't vote them into a position of power and you're not even engaged in having anyone in a position of power to dictate anything, then do they have an authority over you? And the same thing with if someone says, claiming that they have the authority in them vested to them by God, and who is this God that they speak of? And can that God speak to them directly, or is it has to be some gatekeeper? It's like printing money. It's like anybody can print money. Oh, no, wait, you can't print money. You have to be a bank. So how do you become a bank? Oh, you have to be chosen to be a banker by some society or organization. Who is the society or organization? The bankers. Well, how did those bankers become bankers? Well, they became bankers by coming up with something called money and printing money, and therefore they're a bank. Well, why can't I become a banker? Well, you have to ask the bankers to become a banker, but they became a banker without having to ask bankers to be bankers. So there you go. You got a lot of people who can end up being the authority and saying that they're the authority, and no one else can do it. Yet how did they get to have that authority? No one asked bankers to create a system where they can print money, and we have to, and everyone else has to use that as a form of exchange. But a lot of that just stuff happens. The bankers talk to the DA, Kathy. That's good. Yeah, so sometimes you just have to reflect and think on things, and say it's as though if someone was telling you that you have to do something, and you go, why do I have to do something? Because you had to do, because you said so. He goes, well, I have more credentials to you. I've looked into it more. I have more experience than you. Therefore, you should do as I say, and you should listen to me because I'm the expert. So what makes you the expert? Is it just knowing more things? Is it having experienced more things? Is it just whoever's the oldest? It reminds me of these shows. I think it's also what was that movie where or it was actually a book and they made it into a movie. It's a bunch of kids who get stranded on an island, and they end up having this thing like their own society of kids. It's so basically you see the same situation of kid societies against adult societies, multiple things. Excuse me. It's just like Peter Pan and the Lost Boys and things like that. Lord of the Flies. Thank you, Bob. And the thing is, they're usually at odds against adults. And so what my thought was is, at what point is it within that child society where they say, hey, you're now an adult, so you can no longer be a part of our society. Yet everyone gets old, so except for the whole Lost Boys thing. So in any child society in the world as is, where they get old, at what point do they deem that they're no longer part of society? Plus, should it be that the youngest of that child society ends up being the leader? That way, it's the exact opposite, where most of the modern society, the older elders are the leaders. So shouldn't it be the reverse? So that if you have a society of children aged from, say, 4 to 15, right? Shouldn't the leader be the 4-year-old? And are the 16-year-olds going to listen to the 4-year-old? Doesn't that seem a little bit silly? Or is the 16-year-old the oldest one of the child society, the leader, yet or 15? And when he turns 16, does that mean that they have to cast him out and they choose the next oldest person, and therefore the leaders are very short-lived? I mean, it's just interesting look in how that type of society would work. And it doesn't seem to make any sense, yet they depict that out there. And so it's looking at things in that type of way, and in the current system that we have. And I think when I start talking about politics, we're going to try to have a politics night every Friday night. Most people will probably join in and attend. Excuse me. And for me, when I listen to people saying how they need to get money out of politics, and that'll just make things easier to vote for the people who we want in politics. Yet the thing is that the people who legislated to allow money in politics are still in power now. And so in order to get money out of politics, you have to get people who aren't currently the ones that are in there that have legislated for getting money into politics out. You got this whole catch-22, right? Plus, not to mention that back in 2016, you had a favorability rate for members of Congress at 11%, yet the incumbent re-election percentage was from 92%, I think, as the House of Representatives, and something like 96 to 98% in the Senate. So it's like, how does that work? So maybe that's because there's money in politics. So if your thought of is the answer is getting money out of politics by having them legislate to get money out of politics from the same people who legislated to get money in politics so they could be reelected easier, I think your hopes are set on the wrong things. At any rate, this has been a long episode. It's 2 hours, 45 minutes into it. And we'll see you another night. Thank you for joining me.